My name is Marisol Rivera, and I am 28 years old. Never imagined I'd be jolted awake at 2:17 a.m. by the blare of a security alert and the knowledge that someone was inside my greenhouse. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would shatter my ribs. I grabbed my keys and slipped into yesterday's soil-stained jeans, ignoring the chill that crept under the sleeves of my sweatshirt. Every instinct screamed at me that something precious had been violated, and it wasn't just plants. The drive to my property, usually 11 minutes, stretched into eternity. Gravel crunched under my tires, and I couldn't stop imagining what awaited me. When my headlights fell on the gate, my stomach lurched. The padlock lay twisted and broken on the ground. I left the truck running, headlights piercing the darkness. Every step toward the greenhouse made my pulse race faster. Glass crunched under my boots like winter ice breaking. My chest tightened with each movement, the scent of soil, shattered terracotta, and broken growth filling the air. Inside, it was worse than I feared. Pots were smashed. Rare orchids slit open. Succulents crushed. The entire Hartwell property order, $22,000 worth of carefully cultivated plants, was obliterated. Years of work lay in ruins. I forced myself to my knees in the office corner. My fingers shook as I turned on the security monitor, praying it had caught something useful. There he was, Tyler, my brother. The camera showed him looking directly into the lens, garden shears raised, moving with precision rather than rage. Every cut, every smashed plant, every overturned pot was deliberate. He wanted me to see, to know, to feel powerless. I sank further into the floor, shards of pottery cutting into my palms, soil smearing under my nails. 2 hours of destruction. Systematic, cold, precise. I remembered our dinner at Mom and Dad's house a week ago. Mom had smiled, handing me the mashed potatoes. Dad cleared his throat, that prelude to an uncomfortable conversation I'd learned to dread. "Marisol," Mom began gently, "Tyler is between jobs again. We thought your greenhouse could be a perfect place for him." I had swallowed the urge to argue. "I can't afford another employee right now, Mom." "Tyler has no experience with plants." Dad had laughed, a hollow sound. "How hard can it be to water flowers?" I had bitten my tongue, refraining from lecturing on soil pH, feeding schedules, and environmental controls. "I need employees with experience," I insisted. "The Hartwell contract is too important to risk." Tyler had nodded, his smile tight and polite. "No worries, sis, I get it." But he didn't. The messages had started the next morning. "You always think you're better than everyone. Must be nice to have Mom and Dad's favorite business. Guess family means nothing." 3 days of escalating hostility later, I blocked him. The police came, slow at first, like they didn't fully understand the destruction they were witnessing. I handed them photographs, purchase receipts, and a complete inventory. Even they seemed surprised at how methodical I was, how prepared. I didn't cry. I cataloged. I documented. I planned. While they worked, I walked through the shattered remains of my greenhouse, recalling every moment of its construction. Buying the land 4 years ago, overgrown fields, poor drainage. The sweat and blood poured into every beam. Nights sleeping in my truck. Pipes freezing, bursting, replumbing entire sections alone. Driving 6 hours to secure seedlings when suppliers refused new businesses credit. Every small victory and sacrifice flashing through my mind, now juxtaposed with Tyler's cruelty. And then clarity struck. This wasn't just a tantrum. It wasn't random anger. It was calculated, personal, targeted. Tyler wanted to hurt me in a way only he could, in a space I'd built from nothing. I rose to my feet. Soil and shards clung to me, but my hands didn't tremble as much now. "This ends today," I whispered to the empty greenhouse. The sirens grew louder. Dawn's first light tinted the horizon with soft orange. I stepped outside to meet the officers, moving through the debris of everything I had built. The world was quiet except for their approaching vehicles and my heartbeat, steadying as I made a promise to myself. I would rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. Boundaries in place. walls that could hold the weight of both growth and betrayal. By noon, after reports were filed, I returned to my parents' house. The white columns and brick facade felt smaller somehow, diminished against the scale of my losses. I rehearsed what I would say for hours, my throat still constricted when I finally knocked. Mom opened the door, her smile faltered. "Marisol, honey, we weren't expecting you." I didn't answer. I held a folder, security footage, messages, photographs of destruction, everything. "We need to talk, Tyler included." Dad gestured to the living room. Tyler sat on the couch, phone in hand, feigning casualness. I placed the folder on the table. "My greenhouse was vandalized last night. Everything, the Hartwell order, all of it." Mom gasped. Dad's newspaper crinkled in his tightening grip. Tyler leaned back, nonchalant. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. I connected my phone to the TV. The screen flickered to life. There he was, destroying each plant, glancing at the camera to ensure I would see him. Mom's hands flew to her mouth. Dad's newspaper lay crumpled in his lap. Tyler's expression flickered, shock, then anger. "This isn't about money," I said finally, my voice quiet but unwavering. "It's about consequences, something you've never faced." The room fell silent. For the first time, I realized that protecting myself meant standing alone, at least for now. The ride home from my parents' house felt heavier than the night of the destruction. Gravel crunched under the tires like broken promises. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I didn't turn on the radio. There was nothing I wanted to hear except the sound of my own thoughts. The greenhouse sat in the distance, dark and quiet, a hollow frame of what had been. I parked and stayed in the truck for a long minute, staring at the broken glass, the twisted metal. The soil churned into mud and scattered across every surface. Then I stepped out. Each footfall across the gravel felt deliberate, measured. I didn't stumble this time. I approached the gate, unlocked it, and pushed through. Glass crunched under my boots, but I ignored it, focusing instead on the order in which I needed to act. Document, call, secure, rebuild. I pulled my phone from my pocket, already dialing the insurance adjuster. "Yes," I said, voice steady. "I have a complete inventory. Photographs, purchase receipts, replacement costs. I'll email everything immediately." The adjuster's tone held surprise, almost admiration. "Most people don't document this thoroughly. You'll make the claims process much faster." I hung up and walked to the office corner, flipping through the security footage again. Tyler's face stared at me from the screen, calm, precise, hateful. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted me to feel powerless, and for a moment I let myself. Then I remembered, I never stayed powerless for long. I returned to the main greenhouse, kneeling among the wreckage. Broken pots, crushed orchids, succulents flattened under the weight of malicious intent. I began to sort through the debris, separating what could be salvaged from what was beyond repair. The smell of disturbed soil and wet clay filled the air, but I breathed through it. I had work to do. By mid-morning, a police officer arrived at the scene to collect statements. I handed him the printed photos, the security footage, and a detailed description of each plant destroyed. I didn't cry. I didn't waver. This wasn't about emotional release. It was about establishing facts, building a case, and taking control. While the officer recorded his notes, I walked through the greenhouse again, mentally mapping a recovery plan. Security improvements first. Cameras, motion detectors, reinforced locks. Then structural repairs. Then plants, prioritized by value and client deadlines. Everything needed order. Everything needed boundaries. My phone buzzed. Lisa, my assistant, checking in. "I saw Tyler arguing with you last week. I can provide a statement if needed." I typed back quickly, "Thank you. I'll let you know." It was good to know I had allies, people outside the family who saw the truth, people who understood my work, my dedication, my principles. By afternoon, I began clearing the shattered pots and broken plants into piles for disposal. Each movement was methodical, almost meditative. My hands were raw, but the sensation grounded me. I thought about the first plants I ever grew as a teenager, lima beans in paper towels, herbs sold from a makeshift table, and how far I'd come since then. The call came from Hartwell's project manager later that evening. "I heard what happened," she said, voice calm. "We can adjust the timeline if you need it. Your reputation isn't in question. Your integrity is why we hired you." I exhaled, tension easing just slightly. "I appreciate that." "Thank you." After the call, I wandered through the remains of the greenhouse again. The destruction was total, but there was still potential. Soil could be revitalized. Seeds could sprout. Plants could grow back. It would take patience, skill, and persistence, qualities I had in abundance. By the time the sun began to set, I had sorted and secured what remained. My muscles ached. My hands were blistered. But there was a strange sense of satisfaction in knowing I had begun to reclaim control over what Tyler had tried to destroy. That night, I slept fitfully in my small office, surrounded by boxes of photographs, receipts, and carefully labeled trays of salvaged seedlings. Every sound, a car passing outside, the wind rattling loose panels, even the distant barking of a neighbor's dog, made me startle. But I was awake enough to know that vigilance was part of the process, part of survival. The next morning, Michael, a landscaper I'd met during the first greenhouse construction, arrived unannounced with 2 cups of coffee and a pair of work gloves. "I saw the community page," he said quietly. "Thought you could use some help." I blinked, touched by the offer. "You don't have to, I can manage." He shook his head. "I know you can. But you shouldn't have to. This is big work. Let's salvage what we can and start planning the rebuild." And so we worked, side by side, silently at first, then sharing small pieces of conversation. He reminded me of the value of help, not charity, not interference, but collaboration. By sunset, we had cleared debris, salvaged what could be saved, and mapped out a plan for the new greenhouse. Later that evening, the insurance adjuster approved the claim. $18,000. Not enough to replace everything, but enough to begin. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Not because the work was done, far from it, but because for the first time I saw a path forward. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. And Tyler's attempt to break me had, in an unexpected way, revealed the strength I had cultivated all along. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, still stiff from the previous day's work. The greenhouse awaited, broken but not defeated. My phone buzzed with notifications. Missed calls from Mom, messages from Lisa, and emails from Hartwell. I ignored everything but the immediate task, salvaging what remained and beginning the reconstruction plan. By 7:00 a.m., Michael was already at the gate. He waved, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. "Ready to get started?" I nodded, slipping on gloves. "Let's do this." The morning passed in a blur of measuring, cataloging, and hauling broken plant beds to temporary holding areas. Every movement was purposeful. Every plant that could survive went into new pots, labeled and arranged by priority. Around noon, I allowed myself a break. I sat on the edge of a raised planting table, the smell of fresh soil grounding me. I thought about the security footage again, the way Tyler had methodically destroyed everything. I'd watched it repeatedly, trying to understand the person who had once called himself my brother. But understanding wasn't forgiveness. Understanding was preparation. The phone rang, unknown number. I hesitated but answered. "Miss Vega, this is Officer Ramirez. I need to confirm some details for the criminal report regarding the greenhouse incident." I listened carefully, answering clearly, providing dates, times, and photographic evidence. I ended the call with a sense of satisfaction. I was building not just a greenhouse, but a legal case. Boundaries mattered. Consequences mattered. Tyler would learn that. Later, as I reviewed my planting schedule, Michael asked, "Have you thought about hiring help? Someone you can trust?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I've managed alone for years." But my voice faltered slightly, considering the enormity of rebuilding. "I may need part-time assistance soon." Michael nodded, understanding. "Good. You can't carry everything yourself forever. By mid-afternoon, I drove into town to retrieve more supplies. The streets were familiar, but every glance toward my parents' house stirred tension. Their concern, once a comfort, now felt like another obstacle. I shook my head, pushing the thought aside. Business first, boundaries first. While unloading pots at the greenhouse, I noticed a police car pulling into the driveway. Officer Ramirez stepped out, a neutral expression on his face. "Miss Vega," he said. "We need the full statement regarding Tyler. The charges will move forward." I nodded, stepping aside to give him space. I recounted everything: the intrusion, the destruction, the messages, the repeated violations. Each word reinforced the fact that my brother's actions had consequences. I wasn't doing this out of malice. I was doing it to protect myself, my business, and my employees. That evening, I returned home long enough to shower, change, and prepare for what I knew was inevitable: a confrontation with my parents. I had rehearsed the conversation dozens of times. My emotions were steady, my goals clear. When I arrived, Mom answered the door, her smile tentative. "Marisol, honey," I held up my hand. "I need to speak with everyone." Tyler included. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Dad was seated in his leather chair, newspaper folded neatly on his lap. Tyler lounged on the couch, phone in hand, pretending casualness. I placed the folder on the table. Inside, security footage timestamps, photographic evidence, and printouts of all messages Tyler had sent. "My greenhouse was vandalized," I began. "Everything." "The Hartwell order, all of it," Mom gasped. Dad shifted uneasily. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice too smooth. I connected my phone to the TV. The screen flickered to life. There he was, calm, deliberate, eyes locked on the camera as he destroyed row after row of plants. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's newspaper crumpled in his lap. Tyler's expression shifted from surprise to anger. "This isn't about money," I said, voice steady. "It's about boundaries, about consequences, something you've never faced." Silence fell. Mom began gently. "Surely we can handle this as a family. Tyler, he didn't mean—" I cut her off. "No, family doesn't excuse criminal behavior. It doesn't excuse harassment. I am protecting myself." "That is the only concern here." Dad reached for his checkbook. "I'll cover the damages. Let's put this behind us." "Money doesn't fix the problem," I said, lifting my chin. "Respect does. Real consequences do. Tyler will fulfill his court-mandated restitution and community service. Until then, I have nothing more to say." Tyler's face contorted with rage. "You've always thought you're better than me, too good for this family." "Better isn't the point," I said firmly. "Boundaries and responsibility are. You will face consequences, whether you like it or not." The police filed the charges days later. Tyler's face hardened as he read the legal documents. My parents hovered on the sidelines, shocked that I wasn't bending, pleading, or forgiving. Meanwhile, I returned to the greenhouse. Michael arrived with coffee and a pair of gloves. "Ready to rebuild?" he asked. I nodded. "Every detail, every plant, every schedule. Let's do it right this time." We worked in silence for hours, then small conversation began. Michael reminded me of the value of shared labor, of trust, of collaboration. By sunset, the first plan for the new greenhouse foundation was drawn. I slept in my small office that night, surrounded by plans, spreadsheets, and salvaged plants. Exhaustion pulled me under, but this time it was a satisfying exhaustion, one born of progress and preparation. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. Tyler's actions had revealed the depths of my strength. The next morning, I walked through the greenhouse at sunrise. The broken pieces of the past lay around me, but I no longer saw ruin. I saw possibility. I saw control. I saw a future rebuilt on firm foundations, both literal and metaphorical. Boundaries had been set. Consequences had been enforced. And for the first time since the destruction, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. The next morning, I woke with the dawn spilling through the cracks in my small office windows. Sleep had been scarce but necessary. My body ached in every muscle, a constant reminder of the work ahead. I sipped black coffee, staring out at the greenhouse ruins, already feeling the familiar tension of planning everything in perfect order. By 6:30 a.m., Michael was at the gate, carrying a toolkit and a clipboard stuffed with blueprints. "Morning, Marisol," he said, nodding toward the site. "Ready for round 2, I nodded. "First, we secure, then we rebuild." Security had to be my first priority. Last night's destruction had shown me how vulnerable I was, even in a place I'd poured my life into. I walked the perimeter with Michael, marking weak points in the fencing, broken locks, and areas where visibility was low. "We need cameras," I said. "Every entrance, every corner, and a focus on the new greenhouse foundation." Michael jotted notes. "Motion sensors, alarms, everything. I'm not leaving this to chance again." We spent the morning reinforcing gates, installing temporary barriers, and marking spots for cameras. The sheer volume of measures made me feel a strange mix of safety and exhaustion, but control was the antidote to fear. By noon, we shifted to structural work. I'd spent nights sketching and revising plans for the new greenhouse. Larger, stronger, better. Concrete footings replaced the old wooden frames. Polycarbonate panels promised durability against storms, and irrigation channels were redesigned for efficiency. I worked alongside Michael, measuring, leveling, and lifting heavy beams. Sweat streamed down my face, but I welcomed it, a tangible sign of progress, a physical reminder that this was mine. Every corner, every support beam reflected years of planning, sacrifice, and determination. By mid-afternoon, Lisa arrived, carrying boxes of salvaged seedlings. "We can start repotting these," she said, her smile bright despite the chaos. I nodded, grateful for the extra hands. "Prioritize by client orders and survivability. Everything must be cataloged and labeled." We worked together in silence at first, then small conversations filled the greenhouse. Lisa reminded me that help didn't diminish my efforts, it amplified them. Each plant carefully placed, each tray labeled symbolized resilience. Later, I received a text from Hartwell's project manager. "We're tracking your progress. Take the time you need. Your quality and integrity matter more than speed." I paused, absorbing the reassurance. It was a rare acknowledgement from outside the family that my work was valued for more than results, for more than appearances. It gave me strength. That evening, Michael and I walked the perimeter once more. I noticed neighbors watching from their yards, whispering as we passed. News of the vandalism had spread quickly. Some faces were curious, some sympathetic, some judgmental. I ignored them, focusing on the security camera placements and reinforced fencing. Every detail mattered. Every precaution was an investment in the future. By nightfall, the foundation for the new greenhouse was ready. Concrete poured, leveled, and curring. I allowed myself a rare moment to sit on the edge of the structure, surveying the site. The shattered glass, broken pots, and overturned soil of yesterday had been replaced with clean, solid lines. Possibility shimmered in the faint orange glow of streetlights. Over the next week, work continued at a relentless pace. Michael and Lisa became my constant companions, moving efficiently through tasks that once would have consumed me alone. Together, we installed irrigation, labeled and organized plants, and set up the new security system. Cameras gleamed from discreet corners, their lenses promising oversight and vigilance. One morning, I received an unexpected visit. Catherine Daniels, a representative from the Chamber of Commerce, stood at the gate holding a gift basket and a folder. "Marisol Vega?" she asked, voice warm. "Yes," I said, wary but polite. "I'm Catherine Daniels. We wanted to extend our support after hearing about the incident. The local business community stands with you." She handed me the folder. Inside was an invitation to join the association with first-year dues waived, plus contact information for 3 potential clients interested in commercial landscaping. I accepted it with soil-stained fingers. "Thank you, this means a lot," Catherine smiled. Your resilience has impressed many. Not many would rebuild so quickly, so methodically. Keep going. We're here if you need us. I felt a small spark of pride, recognition outside the family, from people who understood the value of persistence, planning, and skill. Days turned into weeks. The greenhouse slowly regained life. Salvaged seedlings thrived in temporary trays until permanent pots were ready. New plants arrived in careful shipments, cataloged and labeled as meticulously as the originals. Every day, I documented, organized, and adjusted schedules for watering, feeding, and sunlight exposure. The Hartwell order, once destroyed, was now being carefully replanted, almost from scratch. Michael remained a quiet, steady presence. His attention to detail matched mine. He remembered measurements I had noted weeks prior, anticipated the next steps, and offered solutions without being asked. Trust grew quietly, firmly, like a seed taking root. One evening, after finishing the day's work, I stood at the greenhouse entrance, looking out over the recovered landscape. Security cameras glimmered, irrigation lines hummed softly, and the faint scent of soil and greenery filled the air. The destruction of the past felt distant, almost unreal. My phone buzzed. A local supplier offered credit terms to help with the rebuild. Another employee inquired about available positions. Support from the community, from business partners, from friends and allies, it was overwhelming and comforting. I allowed myself a small smile. Progress had come not from vengeance, not from money, but from deliberate, patient effort. Each step forward was a reclaiming of control, a reinforcement of boundaries, a promise that nothing, not even family betrayal, could undo the work I had built. By the time the new greenhouse panels were fully installed, the structure was larger, sturdier, and more efficient than before. I walked through the rows of newly planted orchids, succulents, and herbs, cataloging each tray, each pot. My hands bore the calluses of labor, my clothes were streaked with soil, but my chest held a rare, unguarded sense of satisfaction. Michael leaned against the doorway, watching me. "It's coming together," he said softly. "It is," I agreed, "and we're only getting started." Outside, the autumn sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the property. Security cameras caught every movement, irrigation hummed in quiet precision, and the greenhouse stood as a monument not just to survival, but to methodical resilience. Boundaries had been enforced. Consequences had been observed. And for the first time since Tyler's attack, I felt safe, in control, and capable of facing whatever came next. The morning air was crisp as I stepped onto the property, the scent of damp soil and fresh greenery mingling in a familiar, grounding aroma. Michael was already at the greenhouse gate, clipboard in hand. "Morning," he said. "We've got deliveries scheduled for today, more orchids, succulents, and the Westridge contract prep." I nodded, rolling my shoulders, feeling the tightness from yesterday's labor ease slightly. "Let's prioritize by survival first, then profitability. Everything else follows." The security cameras glinted in the early sunlight, a silent promise that last week's chaos wouldn't repeat. Tyler's destruction had been deliberate, precise, but it had also taught me something invaluable. Vigilance and preparation were my most potent tools. Lisa arrived mid-morning, carrying a crate of newly arrived succulents. "I've already started inventory," she said, her voice bright but careful. "Everything's cataloged and labeled." I glanced at the neat rows of plants, feeling a surge of pride. "Good. Accuracy is critical. Each plant here represents hours of labor and planning. We can't afford mistakes." We moved through the greenhouse together, carefully arranging trays according to sunlight exposure and client priority. Hartwell's order would come first. Every plant meticulously aligned to ensure the final installation would meet their expectations. Westridge would follow, a larger contract requiring more hands and more precision. By mid-afternoon, I had made a decision. I needed help beyond Lisa and Michael. Not because I couldn't manage, but because growth required delegation. I drafted a job listing, specifying greenhouse experience, attention to detail, and trustworthiness. The first applicant arrived within the hour. Elaine, early 20s, eager and competent, carried a notebook filled with gardening experience. I watched her carefully as she walked through the greenhouse, noting which plants she examined, how she handled soil, and her understanding of irrigation schedules. "You're precise," I remarked, testing her attentiveness. She looked up, confidence steady. "I take pride in my work. I know what plants need and what clients expect." I nodded. "Good. You start Monday. Part-time initially. We'll evaluate as we go. Mistakes aren't tolerated, but learning is expected." Elaine's eyes brightened, and for the first time I felt that subtle, satisfying warmth of mentorship, passing knowledge forward. Without compromising standards. The afternoon sun dipped low, and I allowed myself a rare moment to breathe. The greenhouse thrummed with life, the irrigation system hissing softly, leaves brushing against each other, the faint rustle of protective netting in the wind. Every sound was a reminder that I had reclaimed control. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Hartwell's project manager. "The Westridge client saw your feature in the business journal. They want a proposal today. Congratulations, your reputation precedes you." I smiled faintly. "Thank you," I whispered, though no one was nearby to hear. The recognition was external validation for years of solitary labor, for every blister, sleepless night, and meticulous record kept. Evening arrived, and I stepped away from the greenhouse to take stock of the perimeter. Security cameras glimmered from corners. New locks clicked securely. Motion sensors hummed softly. I felt a satisfaction I hadn't known in years, a sense that the space, once violated, was now fortified, ready for growth, not destruction. It was then that I noticed a familiar vehicle slowly driving past the gate. Tyler. I froze, heart thudding, but my fingers found my phone and I photographed the truck. Evidence, documentation. Boundaries enforced. I forwarded the images directly to my lawyer. No motion needed. Every violation strengthened my case and reinforced the wall between my past and my future. Michael appeared beside me, sensing my tension. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yes, I documented it. That's all that matters." He didn't ask further, respecting my boundary. That, too, was part of the support I had learned to value. The following week brought new energy to the greenhouse. Elaine began her training, quickly proving herself capable. Lisa handled inventory, cataloging each tray with meticulous care. Michael oversaw structural details and assisted with client orders. Together, we moved through tasks that once would have consumed me alone. The Hartwell order progressed steadily. By mid-morning, the last trays were positioned for optimal growth. Labels, irrigation, sunlight, and soil composition all checked. Precision was restored. Westridge posed a greater challenge. The contract required an installation nearly 3 times the size of Hartwell's. I reviewed plans, coordinated shipments, and began assigning responsibilities to Lisa, Elaine, and Michael. Every detail accounted for: spacing, irrigation, plant health, and timeline. Delegation felt unfamiliar but necessary, a recognition that building alone was no longer sustainable. Even as I focused on work, small ripples of recognition from the community reached me. Local suppliers offered extended credit. Neighbors occasionally stopped by, curious but respectful, checking on progress. Michael's quiet support, combined with Lisa and Elaine's energy, reminded me that the world beyond family could be both supportive and reliable. One evening, after the workday ended, I sat in the office reviewing financials. The insurance check had been allocated carefully. Security, structural repairs, and prioritized plant replacement consumed every penny, but the plan was balanced. Additional income from Hartwell and incoming Westridge payments promised stability. I allowed myself a rare, private smile. Progress, growth, control regained. The following morning, the doorbell chimed. I opened to find Catherine Daniels, the Chamber of Commerce representative. She handed me a small package, a plant for the greenhouse and an envelope with invitations to local business networking events. Your perseverance has inspired others, she said. We want to help you expand your connections. I accepted, gratitude genuine. Support from outside, the family had become as important as the internal work. Allies who respected boundaries, who acknowledged integrity and effort, they mattered. Weeks passed. The greenhouse thrummed with activity. Orders were filled. Plants thrived. Hartwell's installation was complete, earning glowing feedback. Westridge's proposal was finalized, exceeding client expectations. The new employees integrated seamlessly. Yet the shadow of Tyler's betrayal remained, though more distant. Court dates had passed. Restitution and community service completed, his presence no longer loomed over me. Every violation, every harassing message, every drive-by had been documented. Boundaries maintained. Consequences enforced. And through it all, I realized a subtle truth. Rebuilding wasn't just about plants, contracts, or security. It was about reclaiming agency. About asserting control over my space, my time, my energy, and my life. By the end of the 5th week, the greenhouse was vibrant. New beds formed geometric patterns, hanging plants swayed gently, and rare specimens flourished under precise care. Security cameras monitored every approach. Systems hummed in quiet harmony. The space reflected resilience, skill, and determination, all born from the ashes of deliberate destruction. That evening, as I locked the greenhouse doors and stepped back, Michael joined me. "You've built something incredible here," he said, tone quiet, reverent. I nodded, surveying the rows of thriving plants. "We've built something incredible." Together, and for the first time in months, I felt fully in control of my business, my boundaries, and my future. Tyler had tried to break me, but instead, he had forced me to rebuild stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever before. The sun rose pale and clear over the property, its light spilling across the newly rebuilt greenhouse. I stepped outside with a steaming cup of coffee, inhaling the mix of earthy soil and fresh greenery. The past few weeks had been relentless, rebuilding, organizing, documenting, and planning, but the effort had begun to show results. Michael was already inspecting the new irrigation system, checking pressure levels and flow consistency. He glanced up and smiled. "Morning, Marisol. Everything's operating smoothly." "No leaks, no surprises." I nodded, appreciating his attention to detail. "Good. Consistency is key. If one section fails, it jeopardizes everything." He gave a small chuckle. "You run a tight ship. Everything here has to be precise," I said quietly. "We can't risk mistakes, not anymore." By mid-morning, our small team had settled into an efficient rhythm. Elaine was cataloging new shipments of rare succulents, labeling each tray meticulously. Lisa monitored the growth schedules and tracked soil pH levels for every bed. Even minor mistakes could compound over time, so I kept close watch without micromanaging, trusting the system we had built. The Hartwell order was complete and awaiting delivery, but the Westridge project demanded attention. Michael and I reviewed the client's specifications, double-checking the plant lists, measurements, and layout plans. Every detail mattered. One error could tarnish our reputation and undo months of careful work. I paused at the greenhouse entrance, surveying the rows of thriving plants. The sight brought a rare moment of calm. Each leaf, each stem, each pot represented hours of planning, effort, and resilience. I had taken something broken and rebuilt it better than before. Later that afternoon, a small delegation from the Chamber of Commerce arrived. Catherine Daniels led the group, bringing introductions to several local businesses interested in collaboration. "We've heard of your resilience, Marisol," Catherine said. "Your story has inspired others. These connections could help expand your client base." I accepted the introductions with a nod. "Thank you. I'm focusing on growth, without compromising quality." Relationships matter as much as the work itself. One of the business owners, a landscape architect specializing in corporate installations, asked, "We've seen your Hartwell project. Your attention to detail is impressive. How soon could you handle a site of similar size?" I thought for a moment, weighing capacity, staff, and logistics. With proper planning and coordination, we could start within a month. Efficiency and accuracy remain my priorities. Their impressed expressions reinforced a subtle truth. Resilience and meticulous planning were my greatest assets. Hard work alone wouldn't suffice. Strategy, delegation, and foresight made the difference. Back at the greenhouse, I found a quiet moment to review financials. The insurance payout had been carefully allocated, supplemented by new client orders. Westridge's contract promised significant revenue, enough to cover overhead and reinvest in further expansion. I allowed myself a rare smile. Months of labor, sacrifice, and vigilance were paying off. The hum of the irrigation system, the faint rustle of leaves, and the soft tapping of Michael's tools formed a comforting rhythm. This was my space, my rules, my control, and it felt good. But even in the midst of success, the shadow of family remained. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, "Dinner tonight. Tyler wants to apologize again. Can we talk?" I ignored it. Boundaries were non-negotiable. Tyler's court-ordered restitution and community service were completed, yet he had not demonstrated genuine change. My anger had cooled into clarity. Reconciliation required more than words. It required respect, action, and accountability. Michael noticed my hesitation. "Are you going to respond?" "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. He hasn't earned it. Boundaries exist for a reason." He nodded, his steady presence a reminder that support didn't always mean interference. Some battles were mine alone to navigate. That evening, we completed the installation of security cameras across the property. Every gate, corner, and entrance was now monitored, recorded, and backed up. Motion sensors triggered alerts directly to my phone. I watched the screens carefully, scanning each angle, each shadow. Vigilance had become routine, but it was necessary. Elaine set up additional lighting in the rear greenhouse, ensuring that no dark corners would go unnoticed. Lisa double-checked schedules, irrigation logs, and inventory. Michael reinforced gates and fencing, adding tamper-proof locks. The greenhouse was no longer just a structure. It was a system, efficient and secure. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the greenhouse, I felt a subtle satisfaction. Tyler had tried to destroy everything I'd built, but his actions had inadvertently forced me to create a system stronger than before. The next morning brought another challenge. A neighboring business had experienced a minor theft, and their manager stopped by to discuss security measures. I shared insights from our setup, careful to respect confidentiality while offering practical advice. "It's impressive how thorough you are," he said. "Most people wouldn't think to integrate cameras, alarms, and employee protocols so seamlessly." I shrugged. "Necessity teaches lessons." I learned the hard way. The conversation reminded me that expertise carried value beyond profits. Knowledge, method, and resilience were assets that others sought. Weeks passed, each day bringing new orders, new clients, and steady growth. Hartwell returned for additional installations, impressed with the organization and precision of the recovery. Westridge's project began, demanding coordination, planning, and careful execution. Michael, Lisa, and Elaine had become a cohesive team. Delegation no longer felt like relinquishing control. It was a strategic advantage. I could focus on planning, client relations, and quality assurance, while trusted hands executed the work with precision. Late one afternoon, I received a call from a former employee, inquiring about seasonal work. I paused, remembering the challenges of training new hands in the past. "We're hiring part-time," I said carefully. "Experience with plants and attention to detail required. Can you commit to the schedule?" "Yes," she said confidently. "I'm ready to help." I felt a quiet satisfaction. Rebuilding wasn't just about infrastructure, it was about people. The right team amplified success, minimized risk, and reinforced standards. Evenings were spent reviewing plans for further expansion. New greenhouses, irrigation improvements, and client proposals filled my notebooks and spreadsheets. Every decision was deliberate, calculated, and focused on long-term sustainability. The past months had taught me that preparation, foresight, and vigilance were non-negotiable. Michael joined me one night, leaning against the doorway. "You've transformed this place," he said softly, "from devastation to something extraordinary." I allowed a brief smile. "It's still a work in progress, but it's ours to protect, nurture, and grow." He nodded, understanding more than words could convey. Support didn't require possession. It required presence, consistency, and trust. Late that week, my phone buzzed with another message from my mother. Tyler asked again about reconciliation. "Can we talk?" I deleted it without reading. My boundaries were firm. Real change required action, not words. I had no interest in revisiting past betrayals without evidence of respect, accountability, and transformation. The greenhouse hummed quietly in the evening, a sanctuary of life, growth, and resilience. Security cameras blinked softly from corners, irrigation systems maintained precise moisture levels, and the team worked with dedication. For the first time since the destruction, I felt a sense of calm. Control had been reclaimed, boundaries had been reinforced, growth, both personal and professional, was underway. Tyler's shadow no longer dictated my pace or my decisions. Every plant, every beam, every calculated action was proof of my agency. And I would not relinquish it, not to family, not to betrayal, and not to fear. The morning sun spilled across the greenhouse floor, illuminating the rows of thriving orchids, succulents, and herbs. The air smelled of earth, growth, and possibility. I stood at the entrance, coffee in hand, watching Elaine and Lisa move efficiently among the plants. Michael adjusted the drip irrigation, his tablet open as he monitored water pressure. Everything was in place, everything was under control. After months of rebuilding, relaunching, and enforcing boundaries, the greenhouse had become more than a business. It was a testament to resilience, planning, and the refusal to be broken. The Westridge project was complete. Clients toured the property, inspecting installations and praising attention to detail. Notes were taken, suggestions made, but the outcome was clear. The work exceeded expectations. Westridge had become not only a lucrative contract, but a symbol of what could be achieved when strategy met dedication. Michael and I walked through the largest greenhouse, the sunlight dancing across structured rows of plants. "You've done something remarkable here," he said quietly, eyes tracing the neat patterns of growth. I allowed myself a faint smile. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. "Every step, every setback taught me something important," he nodded. "And it's only going to get better from here." The team had settled into a rhythm. Elaine had become indispensable, moving confidently among tasks and assisting in training seasonal hires. Lisa's meticulous inventory and growth tracking kept everything on schedule, and Michael's structural expertise ensured that no setback could derail operations. Each member of the team had become a force multiplier, efficiency, trust, and skill combining to create a thriving environment. Even the clients who had initially hesitated now called regularly, confident in the precision and professionalism that had become the hallmark of the greenhouse. Local suppliers and business contacts offered credit, resources, and collaboration. Community support, once a distant hope, was now tangible. Then came the inevitable confrontation I had long prepared for: my family. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "We'd like to visit and see your progress. Can we come tomorrow?" Tyler included, I paused. Boundaries were clear, but closure required thought. I responded simply, "You may visit, but Tyler must remain outside the property line. No exceptions. Respect boundaries, or we cannot meet." The next morning, my parents arrived in their silver sedan, my mother carrying a small potted plant. A gesture, though tentative, meant to acknowledge care without overstepping. Tyler waited in the driveway, complying with the distance requirement, a court-mandated boundary now strictly enforced. Michael walked beside me, grounding my presence as we greeted them. "Welcome," I said. "I'll give you the tour, but remember the rules. Respect is required." Mom's expression faltered, but she nodded. Dad's jaw tightened, but he, too, understood that this was my space, my authority. We moved through the greenhouses, Michael explaining irrigation systems and structural improvements, Lisa pointing out growth schedules and plant health, and Elaine showing client preparation protocols. My parents were impressed, though they carefully refrained from judgment or interference. From the driveway, Tyler watched silently. I made a conscious effort not to engage beyond acknowledging his presence with a nod. Words had been insufficient. Boundaries enforced through action were now the only language I recognized. After the tour, my parents stood on the porch while I returned to my office. The greenhouse thrummed quietly, life and growth reclaiming every inch of space. Michael joined me. "They've seen what you've built," he said, "and you've maintained boundaries." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It's not about approval, it's about control and integrity. We can't undo the past, but we can secure the future. Weeks later, community recognition reached a peak. Local media featured our success story, highlighting how resilience and professionalism had restored the greenhouse to greater heights. The Westridge installation received accolades, and new contracts began to arrive steadily. I allowed myself brief moments to reflect. Every setback, every betrayal, every instance of harassment had forced me to rebuild smarter, stronger, and with a team I could trust. Tyler's destruction had been a catalyst, and while the scars remained, the lessons they imparted were invaluable. One evening, Michael and I walked among the thriving plants, a rare, quiet moment together. The greenhouse smelled of earth and promise, the irrigation system humming softly. "You've created something extraordinary," he said. "Not just plants, a community, a business, a system. It's inspiring." I smiled, letting the warmth spread. "It's more than I imagined when I started, and it's only going to grow from here." He looked at me, eyes steady. "I'm glad I get to be part of it." The sentiment was mutual. Support, mutual respect, and shared vision had become the foundation for something new, something lasting. Months passed. The greenhouse thrived, orders continued, and client relationships strengthened. Tyler remained outside the perimeter, complying reluctantly but consistently with the court's restrictions. My parents reached out occasionally, offering gestures of reconciliation that were met with polite but firm boundaries. I realized that family, in the traditional sense, didn't define who I could trust or who I would allow into my life. Relationships were earned, nurtured, and respected, a lesson painfully learned through months of struggle. Finally, one crisp morning, I stood at the entrance of the main greenhouse, surveying the rows of flourishing plants, the meticulous irrigation system, and the team working seamlessly together. Michael approached, handing me a cup of coffee. "To growth," he said. I lifted my cup, feeling the warmth and truth of the moment. "To boundaries, to resilience. To what we've built." The greenhouse hummed around us, sunlight filtering through the skylights, casting patterns across the thriving plants. Every leaf, every bloom, every structure stood as a testament to determination, planning, and the refusal to let past betrayals define the future. In that moment, I realized I had not only rebuilt what was lost, I had transformed it into something greater, a sanctuary of life, growth, and integrity. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The sun set, casting long golden shadows across the property. The greenhouse lights glimmered softly, reflecting off glass walls and polished metal. Inside, life thrived. Outside, boundaries were respected. And within me, a sense of completion settled not in perfection, but in triumph over adversity. The story of destruction and betrayal had ended. The story of growth, resilience, and self-determination had begun. I stepped back, letting the quiet settle, surrounded by the living proof of what could be achieved with unwavering focus, clear boundaries, and steadfast courage. Flora's greenhouse, my creation, my sanctuary, my legacy, stood stronger than ever.